Sean plays a Vietnam vet. That's a homeless Vietnam vet in our story.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that's Sean. So what happened is Sean, after playing as a kid actor, he ended up having a really rough go of it. Ended up addicted to meth and other drugs, and ended up being homeless on the streets of Los Angeles. And last year started trying to get sober and kind of trying to turn his life around. And he ended up doing some social media stuff about it. Well, Lionsgate saw it and saw his story, sent him his info and said, you ought to cast Sean in the movie because he's kind of like one of those guys that you're talking about that you're ministering to. So we cast Sean in the movie. He comes in and does an amazing job in this supporting role. Well, long story short, it gets to the baptism scene. And right before he films the baptism scene, he goes up to Greg Laurie and he said, can you walk me through how to make this decision for real? I would really like you to help me understand it. I want to make this decision and I would love for you to really baptize me. And so right before his scene where he's baptized as his character, he became a believer in real life. So it was these amazing moments that happened during the film.
Andy Ewrin, it is great to have you on this Charisma News podcast to be able to talk about this absolutely incredible, beautiful film, the Jesus Revolution movie, JesusRevolution.movie, for those of you that need to go to the website right away. I don't want to make you wait for that. Go check it out already. Andy, I am really blown away by this film. Just before getting to talk to you, my wife and I got to watch this film as a screener, and my response to this was I was tearing up, and as the movie was ending and the credits were rolling, I was spontaneously praying and thanking God for this and asking God to be used in the next move. So if this is happening to me, I can't wait to see what happens in theaters. So, wow.
Well, I appreciate that, buddy. It's a timely story. I think that this film represents an inner yearning for so many people. For believers, I think it represents a desire of God, do it again, move like this, like never before. And for people outside the church, especially for a younger generation, it represents the answer to equation for something I think they've been desperately looking for. This was a story of the hippie revival that happened in the 1970s. After people were just burnt out on the free love and kind of sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of movement, looking for the right things in the wrong places. They were looking for, truth and love and to belong and identity, but they were looking for it in this thing that was a bottomless pit. And when the bottom fell out, they had an encounter with a living God. And it was a moment in time where Christianity was both very overt and it was very counterculture. And those two things shouldn't go together, and they did. And so I think for the people outside the church, it represents a desire for something they don't even know they need, but I think they desperately want. And so it's going to be cool to see what happens.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I have been in Christian ministry for a while in TV and now working with Charisma Media. We really care about revival and want to see revival happen again. Right now, as we're recording this, it's February 22nd. And just recently, one of the big stories that we've been reporting about is the Asbury Revival.
Yes, absolutely.
That broke out in the 70s, and then the Jesus movement, the Jesus Revolution happened. And now that happened at Asbury now, and the Jesus Revolution movie is coming out.
Yeah.
Come on, tell me about this. What's going on with you guys?
Try to tell me that there's not a God. I mean, holy cow.
My goodness.
It was, the cool thing about the Asbury Revival, number one, is I'm so grateful that it happened before the movie's release, because God gets all the credit. It's not something that we engineered. We have nothing to do with it. It's way above our pay grade. And God just sparked it with young people, which is exactly what happened 50 years ago. Right. And so the Asbury ties, in our story, we cover the West Coast portion of the Jesus movement. that happened with Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee and the hippies out in the West Coast.
Right.
But it also simultaneously sparked 50 years ago, February 8th, at Asbury College. And so 50 years later, for God to spark that again, and then now to hear that it's spread to, I think last number I heard was 28 different campuses. It's at Lee College now. It's it's spread to the West Coast. It's a little bit of everywhere. And so it was at Cedarville. So the exciting thing is to see God creating this revival culture amongst young people. And I think the thing that I love about the Asbury thing is that it's not celebrity driven. Even I saw the story of Carrie Job, the singer, showing up, and they had her sit in the balcony and said, "We love that you're here, but we want this to be led by our students." And just like this, to hear stories like that is fantastic. And I think it's exciting. And I think now on the heels of that, to have our film coming out allows us to harmonize and kind of tell the history of what God did then and the hopes of it sparking even farther. So we get to be a part of that harmony.
So I want to talk about the making of this film because, I mean, obviously, anytime that somebody is writing a book or making a film, there's a lot of production that goes into it ahead of time. Okay. From the time that we're seeing things publicly, the film's been already in production for a long time. Right. And so there's no way that the Asbury Revival started and you guys said, "Hey, let's make a quick film about this." God has been speaking to you guys for years about this film. Tell me about this story, what it means to you and your brother with, the Ewrin brothers. You guys have done some amazing films like American Underdog, I Can Only Imagine. I mean, these films are great demonstrations of faith on the big screen, and real stories, and they've done very, very well. But where did you guys say this story needs to be told on the big screen?
Well, I think, John, I think the thing that's exciting is just when it comes to something that's so much bigger than any of us, and an idea of revival and God's Spirit sweeping, our planet again in a fresh way. It's neat to see how it's been on the heart of so many people, whether it's the Asbury Revival or, our friend John Bevere just has a book coming out about revival that comes out next week, I believe. And so there's just so many kind of just this churning. But for us, it started about 10 years ago. We did a movie called Woodlawn, John and I did, and it was a true story. And it was a story that was set in the 1970s about a school that was hit by this spiritual awakening that was the Jesus movement. It was the tail of it. Hit this school that had a lot of racial tension from the last part of integration, and led to the biggest high school football game in the history of the Southeast. And so we kind of told the story through that lens of this one school, kind of that small microcosm. And at the end of the movie, my brother John found this magazine from Time Magazine that on the cover it said the Jesus Revolution. And he traced back 3 years prior to that, and the cover of Time Magazine was an all-black cover that just had the words, "Is God dead?" And he just asked the question, what in the world happened in those 3 to 4 years between the two covers? And he started doing the research about what actually happened during the Jesus movement and the genesis and the kind of inception of what happened amongst these hippie kids that the church thought were completely unredeemable. And God brought this one hippie evangelist that came from Haight-Ashbury up in San Francisco, brought him down the coast, and he is a guy named Lonnie Frisbee that's played by Jonathan Roumie from The Chosen in our film. And then he met this old guard pastor, Chuck Smith, whose church was dying, and Chuck's played by Kelsey Grammer. And the two of those men just caught a vision from each other about reaching the hippie culture. And this revival swept the country. So when John found out the rest of that story, and then found out the story about a young Greg Laurie from Harvest Church, and him being one of the initial kids that was redeemed out of the movement, when he found out the rest of that story, he was like, "We have to do this movie." And I was like, we had just finished American Underdog. I was toast. And I was like, "John, I think we should wait a little bit and catch your breath." He's like, "No, you don't understand. There's an urgency. We have to do it now." And I was like, John, if you feel like you need to do it now, go for it. I'll slide over to produce. You direct it. And we brought in a buddy of ours, Brent McCorkle, who's an incredible director, to direct it with him. And I produced it with the rest of the team. And just as he got done with it, and I saw, the pieces start and come back. Like everybody has to see this now. So I've been out on the road for the past 4 months, just beating the drum of this movie is important because it's super timely and it has something to say. So everybody needs to see it.
Yeah, I love how this movie is completely about Jesus.
Yep.
And it's completely evangelistic, but it doesn't ever feel like you're getting the cheesy gospel message that has been just, not that the gospel message is cheesy, but the way that it's been portrayed has often been that way.
Yeah.
The delivery is so casual and just real. And like, oh my gosh, like Jesus really does speak to hippies and squares all at the same time. Yep. And they need to work together. And I love how you had Lonnie Frisbee and Chuck Smith, like that conversation they had at the dinner table, at the dining room table, was something that you could just see the old guard break down. Yep. And as Kelsey Grammer is playing this, you can just see these walls of resistance fall down.
Yep.
And you were like, this is what needs to happen.
Yep.
And
it's conversation.
It's amazing. Conversation is amazing.
That conversation between these two Titan actors playing these two Titans of the movement was just magic. And it starts with Kelsey Grammer as this kind of old guard pastor with a little bit of a get off my lawn kind of mentality. Mm-hmm. He just leans over to Lonnie and he says, tell me about your people. And he does it very sarcastically. And Lonnie just lets the guard down and says, my people are sheep without a shepherd. And he proceeds to say, to kind of explain that these aren't the bad kids. These are the kids that are looking for the right things, but in the wrong place. And they need Jesus. That conversation is fascinating. And I think the thing that's interesting, as we've shown the film to a lot of different groups, is it's something that every Christian will see their soul and their history in. But for the people outside the church walls, it's so counterculture that these were the rejects. These were the outcasts. These were the people that the church said, there's no way that hippies can get saved. And in the midst of that, God starts doing this massive work. And so it's very countercultural and very overtly Christian. And so as we showed it to Lionsgate, our parent company that is distributing it, Lionsgate watched it. And our boss at Lionsgate, who's not a Christian, is not really a particular person of faith at all, he watched it and he said, don't change a thing. And he said, wow, everything about this movie is exactly the kind of stories we want to tell. And he said, it's made a huge impact on me. I can't stop thinking about it. And so, it's been a really interesting thing that it's a great conversation starter with people that aren't Christians. And I think my encouragement is to the audience is, go to the movies this weekend and invite a lost friend because of the amazing conversations that will come out of it of people that don't know Jesus. It's going to be powerful.
Totally. I know part of that dining room conversation, they talked about everybody's on a quest to find God. Some people are going to drugs and that's leaving them empty. But this line that stuck with me, it says, there's power in desperation.
Yes.
And that really describes a lot of what we're seeing today. Is our desperation is what God's really responding to with these revivals that are popping up in different places. It's desperation in people's hearts and lives. Yeah.
And he turns to Chuck right after that. And Lonnie asks, what would it take to make you desperate, Chuck?
Yeah.
And I think desperation is something that works both ways. I think for the hippies, the desperation came from the fact that they had tried everything that they were told was going to be what unlocked them to knowing God. LSD and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, free love, all these things that were going to be what unlocked the door of them understanding the eternal. And the bottom dropped out and it got ugly. And so they were just completely hopeless that their movement had died. And then in the midst of that, on the other side, the church was dying. The church had lost their voice into culture. They had lost their ability to connect with people, and it was a dying religion. And that created a desperation for people like Chuck. So these two men that are completely desperate for change kind of all of a sudden saw that the answer was, a really getting back to the pure essence of Christianity. And that's where the revival sparked. And I think that's what you're seeing right now at Asbury College. I think you see a generation that's desperate for something real, desperate for something that tangibly matters, desperate to know God. And I think the joy that's coming out of some of the old guard preachers that are watching this happen, seeing their history come back to life, is they're desperate for God to do it again because the church is done. And so I just feel like this is a moment in time where God's going to do a massive work. I think it's bigger than a movie. I think our movie gets to be a part of it. I think the movie's important. I think it's a story that's entertaining, and it's well worth seeing in the theaters. But it's a part of a larger tapestry of God just massively moving in a way we haven't seen in 50 years.
Absolutely. And I love how this is coming out right now. Yeah. And I think this will help. I think maybe the older generation that maybe they grew up during the Jesus Revolution days and the Jesus People days. Yep. I mean, I know that for my entire life, I've heard stories of what happened in the 70s. Yep. I mean, I'm originally from the Pittsburgh area, and there was a Catholic outpouring of the Holy Spirit there. Awesome. And that changed the whole region. And there's a lot of non-denominational churches that grew very big there. So there's this affinity towards the move of the Holy Spirit. But I kind of feel like maybe God is using this film to say, hey, you guys that went through this back then, and you were the hippies, now you're the squares, and I'm bringing a new breed of hippies into your churches, and you got to be ready to receive them. I think God's going to use this movie to help people see that. And in bringing this up, who do you think are the hippies of today?
I mean, I think you look at this current generation, and I think a lot of people in the church, they call them the woke generation. These and I think that each of these, I think kids are the young people, the Gen Zers. They're out and they're looking for significance. They're looking for identity. They're looking for truth. They're really big on justice. All the things that they're looking for the right things, but they're looking for it in this bottomless pit. Whether it's causes, whether it's group identities, whether it's agendas, social media. All of those things, they're looking for it in something that is just a bottomless pit. And I think that hopelessness of justice without Jesus is really an exhausting place to be. It's a dangerous place to be. And so I think as the bottom drops out and they continue to desperately look for something that's ultimately true, I think there's a craving for something real. And so I think it's, you hear a lot of pastors up preaching about people with woke agendas, but I think that's the mission field right now. And I think that Jesus is just calling people to himself of saying, you're looking for the right things. We all want justice. We all want to belong. We all want identity. But I think that there's a missing element. And I think that, so I think that that's the hippie generation right now that desperately wants something that is bigger than themselves. And they don't know what they need. And I think it's found in this story.
And I love the just the storyline of how Chuck Smith is really dealing with these people that were part of his congregation that were not friendly to the hippies. Yep. And you have some of them walk out. But I love the point in the movie where there's a line of people getting in to the church, and you just can't get in because this line is so long. And then you get to see the front of the line, and really at the door is Kelsey Grammer, playing Chuck Smith, washing people's feet.
Yep.
Okay, two things. Yeah. Tell me about that powerful moment in that scene as you're filming that, because you can see that's more than just acting going on there. Wow. But also, did that really happen?
Yes, it did. It absolutely did. Yeah, it really happened. And like I said, I'm a producer on this film. The credit really goes to my brother and John Gunn, the writers, and then John and Brent McCorkle, the directors. We really facilitated their vision. So I'm But as we kind of watch the story play out, there's this pivotal moment where Chuck Smith is getting a lot of pressure from the elders in the church that the hippies are staining the shag carpet because they're coming in barefoot. They don't have shoes. They're not clean. They're very much, just a ratty kind of bunch. And they're saying they're ruining the shag carpet. And Kelsey playing Chuck is like, oh, the carpet. We're worried about the carpet. Let's save the carpet. And so his answer to the solution to the equation really happened in real life is he parked himself at the door and washed every hippie's foot that came in the door. And it made a huge statement, and I think was probably the most visual way you could represent Christianity in its most authentic form. Is that moment, and I think that it really hit home for Kelsey. I think Kelsey had a very profound personal experience in the filming of the movie. He'd always, been friendly to faith, but he was out on his back porch, said he was kind of having a reflective moment, saying a prayer to God, saying, I want to do something with my life that matters. And the next day, the script for Jesus Revolution ended up on his doorstep from his agent. And he read the script, said, I'm doing this movie. And it made a huge impact on him. And he was on live with Ryan Kelly the other day, and when he's promoting the movie, and you can see it on YouTube. He breaks down in tears and says, I'm so proud of this movie, because it made such an impact on him. And so, that those moments are not faked. That's very much something that impacted Kelsey personally. And I think it shows up on film, and I think people have to see it on the big screen because there's a couple of moments that will take your breath away.
I totally agree. I mean, I saw it on my laptop as I'm watching a screener, and I'm like, I got to go see this on the big screen. I mean, there's something about going to the theater with other people, watching it there and experiencing something this emotional, this raw, this real all together. I mean, there's a reason people want to gather at Asbury. There's a reason people want to get together in different places because there is the experiential part of it that is really an important thing. And I'm glad that you brought up the fact that, Kelsey Grammer was on live with Kelly and Ryan, and he broke down. I mean, I started sharing that clip because I was just like, oh my goodness, here's Frazier. He's, I'm so used to him in that role. And now he's playing a pastor that his life was totally changed by opening the door to a hippie. So that's really cool.
It's powerful. And I think what you said, John, I agree with that. There's just something about seeing it in the movie theater. The communal aspect of watching a movie is so palpable and important. And this movie is one that has that kind of communal experience. We've screened it at this point for groups all over the country, probably a couple hundred times. And we've done some very large screenings, and Lionsgate, generously allowed us to do that. Typically that's frowned upon. And they just saw the value that you can't overscreen the right film, because the communal aspect, when we would show it to a theater full of people, is just, it sparked this moment of life and shared experience that was just electric. And so I think it's one that deserves to be seen on the big screen. And I think this weekend, especially opening weekend, is so important because Lionsgate, all the films that we've done up to this point, whether it's, I Can Only Imagine, I Still Believe, American Underdog, all those films have kind of led to a moment where we pushed it all in the middle of the table and said, let's let it all ride. We're going to make something that's the most overt thing we've ever done. And Lionsgate got behind it, gave us the resources to get this movie made, with a movie that's coming out wider than anything we've ever done, with Jesus in the title. I mean, you can't get over that. And so the fact that that's happened, so much is riding on this weekend for them to determine not just the viability of the movie, but the viability of the audience. Are they going to invest in more films like this? So this is an opportunity for the church, the audience to stand up and let their vote be counted with their ticket and say, these are the kind of movies we love. And you can do that experience in the theater. And I think this weekend, Jesus could be the headline on Monday morning. And he already is, with Asbury. But I think the headline could continue to grow. and
Absolutely.
so I think it's exciting to see what God's going to do.
Yeah. So we've talked about Kelsey Grammer. He's
Yeah.
he's one of the big names,
Yeah.
but the other big name up until a couple years ago was really unknown, and that's Jonathan Roumie, who plays Jesus in The Chosen. So I mean, and he's well loved in that role. So now you have the guy that's best known for playing Jesus in the Jesus Revolution film, but not playing Jesus.
Yes.
So just tell me about like the people that you're working with. Tell me about these actors and how God's brought them together for this purpose.
John and Brent did an amazing job casting this film, top to bottom. There's not a weak link. Like everybody just plays their role to a T. Mm-hmm. And you know, like you said, Kelsey was fantastic. But Jonathan Roumie, you know, is such a special talent. And so he just, when he signed on for the role of Lonnie Frisbee, this hippie evangelist, it's a shade of Jonathan you've never seen before. He's mysterious, super funny, very powerful, conflicted, just a very complicated character. But he absolutely steals the show as Lonnie Frisbee. And, you know, and Jonathan's just such a amazing individual. Like, and see, you know, the mantle that's been put on him with what Dallas has been doing with the Chosen has been so cool to see him stand up under that mantle. He's absolutely the real deal. Had a funny moment the other night. I don't think they'd mind me sharing this, but I had a funny moment the other night. We were at a gathering at a friend's house, you know, talking about the movie and having some prayer time. And there's a lot of actors there that are believers. One of those actors was Craig T. Nelson. And so Craig T. Nelson from, you know, The Incredibles and Coach and Parenthood, he's there. And he comes up and he's like, Andy, can you introduce me to Jonathan Roumie? I'm a huge fan of The Chosen. I've just really been wanting to meet him. I want to meet him. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'll introduce you. It's fine. So go over and introduce him. He's like, hey, Jonathan, this is, he's like, oh, he's like, yeah, Craig, so good to see you. He's like, Jonathan, I've wanted to meet you for so long. This is a real privilege. And Jonathan is like, Craig, I arrested you. He's like, what? He's like, I was a guest actor on Parenthood, and there was a scene where you got arrested, and I arrested you. And all of a sudden, Craig's like, my head just exploded. What just happened here? You arrested me on the Parenthood set. I don't know what happened. So it was. There's so many people are a fan of The Chosen, myself included. I was watching episode 3 of season 3 last night, but it's an amazing phenomenon, and Jonathan has handled it so well. But it's a different role for him, this Lonnie Frisbee character, and he plays it to a T. He's such a good actor. And then the rest of the cast, we've got Joel Courtney from Super 8 plays Greg Laurie, and Anna Grace Barlow is an actress that just is magnetic as Kathy. And then Yvonne Franklin plays this time reporter that's getting the story, named Josiah. Kimberly Williams Paisley plays Greg's mom. And so it's a fantastic cast. Not a weekly.
It really is. Yeah.
Real quick, and then is one of the actors that you'll see when you see it is this actor Sean Weiss, and I don't know if you remember him from as kids watching the Disney movie The Mighty Ducks, and he was the goalie. He played Goldberg, the goalie on The Mighty Ducks. Well, Sean plays a Vietnam vet that's a homeless Vietnam vet in our story.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. So that's Sean. So what happened is Sean, after playing as a kid actor, he ended up having a really rough go of it. Ended up addicted to meth and other drugs, and ended up being homeless on the streets of Los Angeles. And last year started trying to get sober and kind of trying to turn his life around. And he ended up doing some social media stuff about it. Well, Lionsgate saw it and saw his story, sent him his info, and said, "You ought to cast Sean in the movie because he's kind of like one of those guys that you're talking about that you're ministering to." So we cast Sean in the movie. He comes in and does an amazing job in this supporting role. Well, long story short, it gets to the baptism scene. And right before he films the baptism scene, he goes up to Greg Laurie and he said, "Can you walk me through how to make this decision for real? I would really like you to help me understand it. I want to make this decision, and I would love for you to really baptize me." And so right before his scene where he's baptized as his character, he became a believer in real life. So it was these amazing moments that happen during the filming.
Oh my goodness. And I just saw something in preparation for our conversation here. I just saw an interview that your brother, John Irwin, and Dallas Jenkins did with Jonathan Roumie. It was I guess a live stream or something. And they were talking about how people were really getting baptized in real life. And they were really like, this was not just something that was done for the film, but it was really happening in real life too.
Yeah.
What was that like, knowing that like, this is still really happening? We can't fabricate this. This is just real. This isn't production magic.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. They filmed, so there's this sacred place called Pirates Cove in Orange County. And it's where the baptisms really they have these mass baptisms. It's this hollowed out beach out of the cliffs that make kind of a natural amphitheater that go down into the water. And it was where they would do these mass baptisms. They still do it to this day there. Mm-hmm. But we went and used that as the location. And as they were filming it and the team was filming it, Jonathan Roumie came up to Greg Laurie. He's like, "Hey, Greg, can you walk me through how to do this for real? Because people are coming up and asking me to baptize them, and I want to make sure I'm doing it right." and so, like these extras that were on set were just having it was just amazing spiritual experiences and saying like, I want to make this decision for real. And or I want to publicly kind of acknowledge a decision I've already made. But it was really cool to just see moments like that organically happen. And I think it's the power of the story. It's just the stories of revivals tend to spark revivals. And just as people kind of experience this idea of the move of God's Spirit, they had legitimate experiences themselves. So it was pretty cool to watch.
Yeah. Now, I did notice a little bit of a cameo that happened, I guess, on the boardwalk there, where you had Paras Patel, I think that's his name, the guy that plays Matthew in The Chosen. Like literally, Jonathan Roumie comes up to him and says, "Do you know Jesus?" And it's just like this moment of like, oh my gosh, this is an Easter egg for every Chosen fan to know what's going on.
That was my brother's doing. He decided to just do a little bit of an acknowledgement of the Chosen audience and just kind of an Easter egg for them. So Paras, it's a small role. He was there for a day playing this kid on the boardwalk when they're out witnessing, and it's a fun. It gets an audible laugh from audiences that are fans of the Chosen, because it's a kind of a moment. But Paras, for me, it was kind of a guilty pleasure, because Paras as Matthew in The Chosen is my favorite. Like I go every time I see him, I walk by him and I just whisper, "Matthew's my favorite." And so, the way he plays that character is, especially playing him on the spectrum, and the character that he and Dallas created is so intricate and interesting and beautifully done that it's I absolutely love that character in The Chosen.
Yeah, so I want to encourage everybody to go to this film in theaters, get information at jesusrevolution.movie online to see to get all the information, to see where it's playing. I mean, I believe it's playing everywhere.
Yeah, it's the widest release. It'll be everywhere.
Yeah, since I saw it this morning, just a few hours ago, I've told a number of people, and they've already told me, "Oh yeah, I've got tickets for that already." And I'm just like, wow, okay, this is spreading far and fast, and this is really encouraging. Yeah. So, Andy, you've been working kind of towards this. You said this movie is kind of like all the chips are on the table, and you just put it all in right now. Yep. I know that God has something more for you guys next. Can you give us a taste or a glimpse of what's coming up next, or what things that you believe that God wants to, what other stories does God want to put on the big screen?
I think that there's several different things that we're interested in. We continue to try to earn the right to be heard. And so, with each of our stories, we try to figure out, what does this story want to be? And so there's different things that we'll do that are for the family, that have, faith, as a part of it, like American Underdog. And then we have things that we go for where it's just the story serves it for us to go through something very overt. We still want it to be entertaining to the audience and earn that right to be heard. But the thing is like, as believers, we're really kind of stepping into a kind of a new renaissance. What I'm excited about, and the thing I'm most excited about with Jesus Revolution, is I didn't direct it. Brent McCorkle directed it with my brother, and Brent's a director that we've been working with for about 10 years on different projects. He helped me edit Woodlawn, I Can Only Imagine, and the Jesus music, and so and he helped write and all these things, and now he directed. So to see this next round of filmmakers stepping into those roles and us being able to kind of fuel their stories, I feel like there's an opportunity for us to blow the top off and be able to say, hey, we're going to experience the heyday of faith film. And I think a lot of it just determines that, again, we get the talent is there, the stories are there. It's about the audience voting and the studio pouring resources into it. The stories that we have on the horizon, we're very interested in biblical stuff for sure. I mean, I think I would love to see, what The Chosen has done, continue to see that universe grow. I think it's something my brother's really passionate about. And then for me, my favorite book is a book called Fearless. And it's a New York Times bestseller about a Navy SEAL named Adam Brown and his redemption story, and him going from being a drug addict with 7 felonies on his account to dying a hero's death as a member of SEAL Team 6. And his story has stuck with me for so many years that when we finally got the rights to it, Jason Hall, who wrote American Sniper, is writing the script right now. And that's the next one I'm sinking my teeth into. And so that one's going to be an amazing project that that's been a passion project of mine. So I think we've all have our stories, but God's just, I think, has the ability to blow the doors off right now.
Wow. So there's a couple scenes that I just really loved and I can relate to. I was a missionary with Youth with a Mission for 8 years. So awesome. whenever they were praying for the car to start, that scene cracked me up because it's so relatable. I mean, I think everybody that has had a bit of a junker car or has had to you've had to really have faith to get from one place to another has had an experience just like that. Yep. And that just made me laugh out loud. I just appreciate the prayers. God, you're not making me look too good right now.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that humor, came from Jonathan Roumie. He's hysterical. Really? Wow. They would have these scenarios written out with a little bit of dialogue, and they're supposed to pray over this car that, to try to get it started, and all the hippies are praying for it. And Jonathan just kept going with it and ad-libbing this prayer. And it just got more and more hysterical and relatable because it's very real life, especially to those of us that have grown up in the church. But that was Jonathan. And so there's a lot the thing that people have watched the movie, one of the comments they make that they're most surprised about is how much humor there is in the story. There's a lot of just fun, humor kind of these scenarios. And then it turns on a dime to go somewhere that just really grabs your heart. So it's that was one of those scenes that we've all been there. It's great.
Yeah. So definitely audiences are going to laugh. They're going to cry. They're going to shed a tear in an emotional way where you're moved by the Holy Spirit as you're watching this. And so I just want to encourage everybody, again, go to jesusrevolution.movie to get all the information to watch. I know you guys are all over social media as well, but go to this film, take a friend, and your life is going to be changed. And I know I just had an emotional experience with my wife watching this film and wanting to be used more by God as a result of watching this. And so if we get a whole bunch of people to have the similar type of experience, I can't wait to see what type of Jesus Revolution 2.0, the 2023 edition, we can really get rolling here. So, Andy, I do want to ask you some personal questions here, if you don't mind my asking here.
Let's go.
So you've been a producer, a filmmaker, director. You wear a lot of hats, and you've got a pretty cool one backwards there right now. Just from my own thoughts.
Hats are my love language. So
yeah. So, how did you get into this and know that this is the calling that God has for your life?
It was one of those that we kind of stumbled into. John, we were kids that grew up around the industry. My dad was in news growing up, he was a news anchor, and then he got out of that to kind of go into ministry, and then ended up in Christian radio. And so we kind of grew up around it. But there was a little local station that my dad worked at when I was 15 and my brother was 12. And they would let us use the equipment from midnight till 4 a.m. if we helped volunteer on the shows during the day or during the afternoons. And so we would just lock ourselves in and just kind of play with equipment and just had this dream of what if we got to make movies one day. And so, as that dream grew, I went off to a Christian college and, they had their, obligatory kind of mission conferences and that type of thing. And everybody was making these commitments to be missionaries. And it got to me and I was just like, I feel like I'm supposed to be a missionary and go translate Bibles overseas or something. And somebody that knew me well just laughed and they said, Andy, is that what you want to do? And I was like, no, not at all. It's just what I feel like I have to do to be a good Christian. They're like, Andy, what do you have in your hand? I said, well, I've got a camera. I don't know how God could ever use a camera. And he said, give God what's in your hand, let him figure out how to use it. And so that began kind of a commitment for me. And John had a similar experience of saying, okay, God, being kids from Birmingham, Alabama, that want to do stories about our faith for the theater was probably the dumbest dream you could have had at the time. Like it didn't exist. The Passion of the Christ hadn't happened. And so there was no opportunity for that whatsoever. But God just planted that seed in our heart. And then the Passion happened. The doors opened up for there being opportunities. And we just continue to kind of pay our dues until we were directing second unit on John was directing second unit. I was doing music videos. But John was directing second unit for the film Courageous. And Kendrick Brothers did. And Alex Kendrick pulled John to the side and said, John, why are you here? And he said, I'm here for a paycheck. He's like, it's time for you to get off the sidelines and find what stories God has for you guys to tell. And we just said, he just said, Alex, we don't really do the same kind of stories as you guys do. We really are trying to find our voice. He's like, don't try to be us. Find what God's called you to do. And we found our voice in doing true stories of redemption that are, kind of outward faced from the church of being an introduction to Christianity to a curious world. Is kind of what we do. And we found our voice, and we found that voice really on Woodlawn. Took a few films for us to really find what we do. And after that, we haven't looked back since, and we tell true stories of redemption. And I'm grateful every day for Alex challenging us to find our voice.
Wow. So you guys like grew up playing with cameras and right. things. That's awesome. I mean, that's a really cool opportunity that you had. And the fact that, the I know what it's like to work in Christian media and in Christian, Christian TV station. Yeah. And just to know like, okay, everything is, probably not the top end equipment, but you have a guy that it's their job to keep it working.
Yep.
Like his entire job is to keep it working. And he probably hated you guys or loved you guys, one of the two.
No,
so
he hated us because we'd always be like, that 3/4 inch deck, it just it spit the tape back out and it's like confetti. And that was definitely kind of the early days. And then that kind of spun into this youth camp that we used to help with in upstate New York. And I was 18 and they asked me to do video work for these 500 campers that would come each week. And we do short films for them. So I called John and I said, would you want to come up and work for me during the summer? And so he came up, and the very first one we did was this Knights of the Round Table kind of movie, the 15-minute film short, Knights of the Round Table. Like for us, it was a big deal. And got done with it and showed it to the campers, and it ended with this big, massive kind of climactic scene. And then it's done, and we're expecting there to be a standing ovation, and it's crickets, just quiet. Oh. And there's one 12-year-old kid in the front row that was like, "Is that it?" Like that. And it's
oh my goodness.
It's so permanently scarred my brother that to this day he can't sit through one of his movies. Like if he's in there with a crowd, he's antsy and freaking out because he's convinced that somewhere this kid's going to be there as a 40-year-old man and going to be like, "Is that it?" So anyway, it was those were the early days.
So I'm very glad that you guys stuck with it even after getting that "is that it" comment.
Yeah,
I mean that's really That's really cool that you've just been able to take those opportunities as the Lord's put them in your path there. One of the questions that I love to ask people whenever I have the opportunity is, when you look back at your life now, and just like the disciples were walking on the road to Emmaus, and here's this guy that comes alongside with them, and they're talking with him, and they have no clue who he actually is until they get to Emmaus. They invite him in, and they sit down at the table, and it's Jesus in disguise, and they just don't see that it's him. And until they sit down, he blesses the food, breaks the bread, their eyes are open, and then poof, he's gone. And one of my favorite verses is that Luke 24:32. Weren't our hearts burning within us along the way as he was revealing the scriptures to us? So I like to ask this question, when you look back at your life now, along the way, where do you see that your heart was burning in that moment, but you didn't realize it then, but you can see it now?
And I think you look back on those moments because they're sacred, and you would love to just camp out there for your whole life. But, the Christian walk is a journey, and there's got to be the valleys, so you kind of appreciate the mountaintops. The Mount of Transfiguration, like Peter wanted to pitch a tent, live there. It was like, let's camp out. And they had to go down the hill and kind of face challenges. And, but I think one of those mountaintops for us, for me, was when we were doing I Can Only Imagine. When we stepped in to do that movie, we were doing it independently financed. We'd had, disagreements with different studios and just a different vision, and decided to go make it. We were coming off of Woodlawn, which Woodlawn was where we found our voice, but it was financially not successful. And, we're just at this razor edge kind of moment where it's like, we could go either way. We could either fall into oblivion and not be able to do this job anymore, or we could find our voice. And we were on the first day of filming. We had not cast the father role yet. So Dennis Quaid had not signed on. He didn't sign on until we had been in the production for about 3 weeks. And I'm in this film that I have a cast of some good actors, but not any big name actors. And we're filming the first day. The first day always goes rough. And I got done with that day, and I went back to my apartment in Oklahoma City where we were filming, and I had a panic attack. And I'm like, God, I'm either making the best movie ever or the worst, and I don't know which one of the two it is. It could go either way. This could be a train wreck. And God just laid it on my heart. It's like, is that okay? And I'm like, okay, God, if it's a train wreck, it's your train wreck. Let's make the best movie that we can. And I just pray that you be in it and show us what movie you want to make. And there's something really freeing. You think that God's trying to kill you, but there's something really freeing when you stop thinking about self-protection of like, what am I going to look like? I don't want to look stupid. And you let go of the boat instead of clinging to it for dear life. And you're like, I'm going to swim. And if I drowned, I drowned. But we're going to swim for sure. And there's just something freeing when you get to that point of kind of thinking like, well, I'm already a dead man, so let's go for it. And there was this place of abandon that I thought was the most terrifying thing I would ever go through. Looking back on it, like you talk about, weren't our hearts burning within us? Like, my gosh, I just would love to have another imagined experience like that again. It's like, the sweet fellowship with God there that I didn't know I had not tasted in any other way like that. And so film full circle ends up, we finish it and we're releasing it. We're having an opening weekend like this weekend with Jesus Revolution. Friday hits and the numbers come in, and just the audience showed up, and it's just it was a moment. It was just a moment. I think it's a moment that might happen this weekend again with Jesus Revolution, but it was just a moment. But rather than it validating me as an artist and feeling like I'm a big deal or I've made it or I'm successful, my eyes filled with tears. I was sitting in Dallas, Texas. Film was screening next door. We're doing appearances there. And I was at the food court at the Galleria Mall in Plano, Texas, and sitting there watching the crowds going by. I had tears in my eyes. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared. And I just was filled with gratitude. And I was like, God, how cool to be a part of a moment where we're getting to see you move. And you gave me a front row seat to see you perform your miracles. And so I think for me, it goes back to that idea that you asked earlier about desperation. I think the greatest victories come out of a moment of desperation. where you realize that if God doesn't intervene, I'm dead. And God shows up in a way that's unexpected, where he gets the glory. And he reminds you that, as puny as we are as individuals and as humans, that his eye is on us. And it feels good to see God breathe into something that you're a part of. And so
that's really good. Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful. Kind of as a follow-up to that, I like to ask, if you, knowing what you know now, Andy, could go back in time and give some advice to young Andy, whatever part of your timeline that you would like to intersect with, and give yourself some advice, what would you want to tell yourself, and what's going on in your life at that point that you would want to receive that message?
I would go back and communicate to myself, be patient. God doesn't waste the pain, and the journey is not by accident. Every bit of it has meaning and purpose. Be patient. And I think as a younger artist, and I try to communicate this to other artists I talk to, there's this panic of I've got to make it now. I've got to be discovered. I've got to make my mark. I've got to do all this panic. And I think it comes a lot more from American society than it does from God-breathed inspiration. And I think that God's not nearly in as big a hurry as I was. And, when you love the Lord and you want to walk with him, you're right on time. And I would just communicate with myself, he's not going to let you miss it. And just be patient, be faithful where he's got you. He's given you something to say with your life, and you got to go through the journey, and it'll happen right on time. And so, there's an ease that comes with that I think there's a lot of unneeded anxiety, in the middle of the journey. Cause you feel like, you've got to have all the answers, and you don't.
Well, Andy, speaking to young Andy back in your past and needing that message, John from today needed to hear that right now. And so I thank you so much for that, because that's just, wow. That patience is really an important thing. And right now we are in the cusp of a move of God that is getting ready to burst at the seams. This film that God has commissioned you and your brother to make, the Jesus Revolution, is about to be released to the masses, who obviously are hungry for the truth, not to be satisfied with the drugs or any other things that have been counterfeit, that have pulled them away, where they've just really found emptiness. And this film, this work that you've been doing, how God has led you on this journey to where you are today, it's humbling to be able to see how your piece of this puzzle is really a huge piece, is really an integral piece for God's big piece, or God's big puzzle, that we're getting to see right now unfold. And I just want to thank you so much for telling these stories and finding these stories that, you're not just taking some book that was out there already, or, some other story that was just like, you're not just taking a book adaptation, you're finding the real stories. And yes, there might've been stuff from books or whatever, but this is original stories. This is stuff that God really wants to share in the modern day, and in the modern way is on the big screen. And you and your brother are doing a phenomenal job. And I just want to encourage you to keep it up. Thanks, and I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about your journey and what it's been like to create this film as well. So
thank you, dude. I appreciate the support. And I think that, there's power in true stories. God's given us all our own story that has power to it. The Bible says that they overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the power of their testimony. And, your testimony is your story, and it has power, has truth, and what you've lived has truth and power. So excited to see what God does with this true story this weekend, and appreciate all the support for what you guys do.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much, Andy. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, buddy. It's my pleasure, bud. Always love talking to you.
Thank you for listening to Along the Way. If you've enjoyed joining me along my way, please share this with a friend who you think will be encouraged by this podcast. Also, please rate and review Along the Way on iTunes. That helps more people discover Along the Way. And subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and at my website, alongtheway.media. I hope that you've enjoyed this part of my journey, and may you realize when Jesus is walking with you along your way.